Thanks, Tucker. One final question from the press gallery, Kat Wong from AAP.
Hi, Tucker. Thank you so much for your address today. So you talked a little bit about immigration, and in the past you've talked about how white Australians, Americans, Europeans are being replaced by non-white immigrants in what is often referred to as the Great Replacement Theory. This is the same...
Have I said that whites are being replaced?
Well...
I don't think I said that.
Well, it's been mentioned on your show 4,000 times. And
really, when did I say that?
On your show.
I said whites are being replaced?
You have said that before.
Really?
Yeah.
I would challenge you to cite that, because I'm pretty sure I haven't said that. I said native-born Americans are being replaced, including blacks.
Native-born Americans.
Native-born Americans. And Americans black Americans have been, African Americans have been in the United States for, in many cases, their families over 400 years. And their concerns are every bit as real and valid and alive to me as the concerns of white people whose families have been there 400 years. So I've never said that whites are being replaced. Not one time. And you can't cite it.
Untrue.
So we just met, but when our relationship starts with a lie, it makes it tough to be friends. So
well, you've been lying
let's
about
pull
my
that back. I'm happy to
colleagues
explain what I do think.
So.
Well, you actually can't say it because I didn't say it, and I don't believe it. And I'm telling you that to your face, so why don't you just accept me at face value? My concern is that the people who are born in the country are the main responsibility of its leaders. And as noted earlier, when those leaders shift their concern from the people whose responsibility it is to take care of to people around the world to put their priorities above that of their own citizens, that's immoral. And they are being replaced in my country, people who are born in the United States. And the birth rate tells the whole story. They are not at replacement rate. And so the US population is growing because we're importing people from other countries. And my view is that happy people have children, and a functioning economy allows them to do that. And we don't have that. And so you need to fix the economy and fix the culture and make it so that people who want to have kids can. You don't just go for the quick sugar fix of importing new people. Like, that's my position. And if you think that's racist, that's your problem.
I never called you a racist.
But of course you are suggesting, and
well,
I must say one of the reasons people don't like people like you in the media is that you never say exactly what you mean. Your slurs are all by implication, and you're about to tell me the Great Replacement Theory is racist or anti-Semitic, whatever. I've said what I've said to you right now like 100 times in public. I hope to, if I live long enough, say it 100 more times. I think it's completely honest and real, not racist or scary. It's factually true. It's not a theory, it's a fact. And the whole point of your question was to be like, you're a scary racist.
Well, I haven't.
And my response is, no, I'm not. Okay, well, how about no more lying in your questions, and then I'll answer it.
Okay, well, this is the same theory, or as you say, idea, that has inspired the New York Buffalo shooting where 11 black Americans were killed. Two white Americans were killed.
Like,
and it's also inspired...
it's not, first of all...
It's inspired one of the worst Australian guns
How do they
of all
get
time
people
to
this
shoot
stupid in the media? I guess it doesn't pay well. Look, I'm sorry. I've lived among people like you for too long, and I don't mean to call you stupid. Maybe you're just pretending to be, but I'm totally against violence. I'm totally against the war in Ukraine, for example, which doubtless you support. And like all dutiful liberals, support more carnage. I don't. I hate mass shootings, actually. Nothing I said, what does it mean to inspire something? My views are not bigoted against any group. They're honest, they're factual. That's not hate, that's reality. And my views derive from my deep concern for Americans, actually. Americans aren't having kids because they can't afford to. And nobody in charge cares. And so that's my position. That doesn't inspire mass shootings. How dare you try to tie me to some lunatic who murdered people? How dare you, actually? And in fact, I mean, do you know what I mean? I'd be like, Hitler wore those shoes. A lot of people are saying that you're like Hitler. Can you explain those shoes? Hitler wore exactly the same shoes, and you're like, I've got nothing to do with Hitler. Well, that's how I feel about your absurd, disingenuous question.
Right, so therefore you support gun control?
What? I thought it couldn't get dumber, but it did. No, I don't support disarming law-abiding people so they can't defend themselves. So the government has a monopoly on violence? I don't think so. First of all, in my country, that's illegal, as you know. But moreover, it should be illegal in every country. A sovereign person has the right to defend himself and his family. Period. And that said, I'm totally opposed to harming anyone. Are you concerned about the war in Ukraine? And the countless innocents being murdered there every single day? I doubt you are. Probably Putin bad. I am. I'm a Christian. I hate violence. I hate mass shootings. I have guns at home and often on my person when I'm in the United States, I'm proud to say, because I want to defend myself and those I love against violence. That's the point. I'm not perpetrating crimes. I'm not shooting strangers. I'm defending what I love. And if you're against that, I guess I would ask why. Why would you be against that?
Well, so you don't think you harbor any kind of responsibility for these hate crimes?
I'm sorry. I'm trying to be charitable. I was like, maybe you're just pretending to be dumb. Now I don't think it's an act.
Tucker, thank you for taking those questions. I'm sure you enjoyed some
Actually, I
questions from the
loved it. I
press.
just feel sorry. I mean, because I got here and the country's so unbelievably beautiful and the people are so cheerful and funny and cool and smart. I'm like, your media's got to be better than ours. It can't just be a bunch of castrated robots reading questions from the boss. And then it turns out it's exactly the same, maybe even a tiny bit dumber. Okay, I'll take your question. All right. Are you from ABC? I'll repeat the essence of your question. I can hear. Yes. So, thank you. I would say two things. For those who didn't hear it, the question was, it turns out a lot of things that have been derided as conspiracy theories actually bear, more investigation, actually. And given that, how do you feel about the prospects of a free and fair election in November in the United States? I think is that a fair summation? So I would say first to the phrase conspiracy theorist, which I'm certain has got to be a staple of your news media given the selection of questions I just received. That it's worth knowing the provenance of that phrase. It comes directly from the Central Intelligence Agency, actually, 1964. In the aftermath of the murder of our president, John Kennedy, in November of 63, there was a very famous and entirely fake investigation into it called the Warren Commission, and people who were reading it critically noticed anomalies, like they didn't want to investigate the guy who shot the lone gunman. You're like, what? And raised questions about it, and that phrase, conspiracy theorist, entered the lexicon in my country, and it was designed to shout down and shame people who ask legitimate questions. Now, that said, there are a ton of wackos out there, and a lot of them show up at my house, and they're nice people, but they're clearly a little touched by the Great Spirit. That's all right. I mean, there are crazy people for sure, but there are also far more people who just noticed, like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of where I started. Like, well, what is that? Shut up, racist or conspiracy theorist or whatever, lone, mass shooter or whatever this chick called me. So I think the first step is recognizing that that's a control tool. Those are not the responses of someone who seeks an honest adult conversation with you where you sort of share evidence and arrive at consensus. That's someone who believes that he can make you shut up like you would by yelling at your dog, so he can go do something awful without you interfering with him. That's the truth, okay? So anyone who uses the term conspiracy theorist is by definition discredited in my view. Why don't you address the specifics of the claim I'm making, no matter what it is? The second thing I would say is I've lived long enough and covered the news long enough to not discount anything. It doesn't mean every theory is true. I hear some wacky theories. But given what we now know about so many different things, how can I, in good faith, just dismiss something out of hand? I just can't at this point. You have to stay curious, stay rational. I mean, I think people should always stay rational. Like, where's the evidence for it? If there's no evidence, it's probably not true, or you can't prove it. But stay open-minded. And as to the question of the election, you know, I'm very concerned. I'm very, very, very concerned. And I don't understand, like, I guess I do understand why the institutional Republican Party in Washington hasn't done more to secure elections. We have this problem of electronic voting machines, which are not more efficient. They don't produce more precise answers than written ballots, and they don't get us the tally quicker than written ballots. So the question is, why do we have them? Okay, that's one area. But the much more significant fact, I would say, is that the way Americans vote was changed completely using the pretext of COVID. And the idea was that Americans were so sick with this killer virus that emerged from a pangolin in a wet market. They were selling mammals in a seafood market for some reason in Wuhan. They were so incapacitated they couldn't actually make it to the polls. And so they needed to have their ballots anonymously picked up in these drop boxes without using voter ID. And it had nothing to do with voter fraud at all. It was purely a medical response. Well, now COVID is, of course, still around. It hasn't gone anywhere. Once Fauci created it, it's going to be here forever. But we're not worried about COVID anymore for some reason. But the voting changes remain in place. And it's very clear to me that the point of them was to abet voter fraud, obviously. And I don't think that okay, that's fine, there's voter fraud around the world, but you can't simultaneously claim that you're here to defend democracy and abet voter fraud at the same time. Because voter fraud undermines democracy very obviously, more than anything else, right? If people can't trust election outcomes, you don't have a democracy. And Americans can. And I'm very distressed about it, and I don't really know, but there seems to be no appetite to do anything about it. I mean, one of the things, you know, and I won't go on, it's the last thing I'll say, but the question of voter ID is not a question in most civilized countries. France, for example. You don't have an ID, you can't vote. I mean, because how do we know who you are? And we take elections seriously. Even in France, primitive, stinky France takes elections so much more seriously than we do. It's shameful to me as an American. And so, but we were told you can't do that because African Americans just don't have IDs. Really? Right. Is there evidence for that? So in my country, you can't do anything without a government ID. You can't cash a check. You can't have a bank account. You can't buy a pack of cigarettes. You can't check into a hotel. You can't get on an airplane. You can't get on a Greyhound bus. You can't do anything without a government-issued ID. Of course, you can't drive a car. And so some enterprising independent journalists went out and tried to get the numbers on this. And it turns out nobody doesn't have a government ID. If you don't have a government ID in the United States, that means you can have no contact with government. You get nothing from government. You don't exist in the eyes of the government without a government ID. So the adult population of Americans of any color who don't have government-issued IDs is like approximately zero. Okay? It's like someone in a nursing home. And yet nobody in the media noted this. And to this day, we don't have voter ID laws in state after state because it's considered racist. And it's yet another example of the way that ruthless people with, I think, evil intent leverage the inherent decency of the citizens of our country to get their way. If they said, we're just going to commit voter fraud, and if you don't like it, we're going to shoot you, the people of the United States would rise up as one and put them down. But instead they say, you're a bad ask questions, you're a racist. Well, no decent person wants to be a racist, including me. That's awful. I think God created every person with identical moral value. Identical. We are all creations. That's my view. So racism is like abhorrent to me. So I don't want to be called racist, and neither is anyone else in my sweet country, because Americans are really decent people. So that claim right there is enough to shut down the opposition sufficient to roll over it. And that is exactly what's happened. And I hope we're at a point where we just stop taking them seriously. These are people who don't care about the meaning of words, who will accuse you of abetting a mass shooting because you think your country has too many illegal aliens. Like, it's freaking insane. So obviously they don't really mean it. They don't really care. They just want you to be quiet because you're inconvenient. And my strong advice to you is don't be quiet. Because if you're quiet,